everyone, and welcome to the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast. I am Amanda McCrossin here with a new face, two new faces, in fact. You've heard us talk about her before, the wonderful Laura Koffer, who is our associate producer and also in the wine team at Wine Access. Longtime listener of the podcast and contributor, and we're super excited to have her as a co-host today. Welcome, Laura.
Yeah, super excited to be here. I love both of these wines and can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun talking to a chef today because this is the first episode that kicks off our Michelin series, which is going to be a 4-part series in which we talk to 4 different chefs, 4 different restaurants, all Michelin starred from 4 different cities. And we're going to talk about their respective cuisines, the cities that they live in, some of their favorite foods. And I'm excited to dive in because I'm a fan of all of these restaurants, even the ones that I haven't been to that I'm longing to go to. But I will say that I have been to the one that we're going to be talking about today. So without any further ado, welcome Chef Troy Jorge of Temporis in Chicago.
How you guys doing? Thank you for having me on. Super excited.
We love having, you're not a Chicago native, you're a Boston native, which I made the mistake of maybe pointing out accidentally once upon a time when I text AJ and I was like, hey, he's so awesome. I love his Chicago accent. And he was like, he's from Boston. It's like, I'm
yeah,
an
they
idiot.
still give me
Cool.
shit for that.
I'll never live it down. But I will say it was like one of the most epic meals I've ever had. And if you haven't been to the restaurant, it is a smaller restaurant in Chicago, incredible food. We are going to be talking about how to have an epic meat night with chef. And we've talked about going plant-based before. We've had conversations about steak before, but we're going to be talking to the pro about all things steak, how to cook it, what cuts, what to pair with it. Are steak sauces like an approved vehicle to work with? I don't know. We'll see. But before we dive into any of that, let's talk a little bit about what has been going on in the world of wine. For those of you who don't know how the scores work in the wine world, these publications essentially request samples most of the time and they taste them blindly. Those some publications do often go to the wineries themselves. In any case, they taste them, they give them scores, then you see them printed, right? For James Molesworth at Wine Spectator, this is the first year that all 5 of the first gross from Bordeaux have elected to not submit their wines for scoring to Wine Spectator and have instead requested that if they want to taste the wines, they should do so by visiting the property, which of course kind of goes against the ethos of all things that they believe in because they taste them blindly. And you're not supposed to know what the wines are when you're tasting them because that's not objective. What did you think of this article, Laura? Was there any like takeaway for you that you were like, oh, that's weird?
I think scores are incredibly helpful to consumers. I understand the system, as it is used by retailers, by mostly, not so much in the restaurant. So I respect that world, but an interesting choice for these wineries to kind of turn their back on it and say this is unnecessary for us, and we want to be able to show you our whole story and have you come to the property and control the setting. So it's kind of this power dynamic, the struggle between the critics and the producers. Interesting to see how it's going to play out. I don't think it's going to hurt the sales of any of these wines.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to these wines finding their way into the hands of collectors, I don't think this will have an impact, but it does make a statement.
It's super interesting. And I think one of the more fascinating things that you can read if you don't want to read the article is actually James's Instagram post. The comments section is pretty interesting. He's responded to a lot of them. People have their own speculations as to why these wineries decided not to submit, but I don't know. I don't really know much about the 2020 vintage other than what has been early reported and that it's a little bit, it was like fine, but like slightly inconsistent. So I think to your point, Laura, like I'll be curious to see if this continues into future vintages, if it was vintage related, or if this is just a signal that like scores are not something that wineries are interested in chasing any longer. Chef, are you into scores? Do you follow scores at all with wines?
No, not really. I kind of leave the score until the professionals.
I've actually never asked you. Are you like a big wine drinker?
I mean, I like red for sure.
Yeah.
I could go without white, to be honest. But they always
Oh, I
tell
hope
me
we change your
my
mind today.
Interesting.
they always tell me my food is very white wine friendly, so they're surprised that I don't drink white wine.
Your food is very white wine friendly. And in fact, it's also very
Yeah.
sparkling friendly as
Yes.
well. The next one, Laura, I love you and I hate you for including this in our roundup today.
Buckle up.
I will say, moving to Napa from New York City, I had my eyes opened to corkage and all things BYOB. And in fact, I remember sitting down for like one of my first interviews with our GM, Spencer, who's a listener of this podcast. Hi, Spencer. And I remember sitting down with him and he was like, hey, just so you know, and he moved from New York too. He was like, hey, corkage is like a very real thing out here and people love to bring their wines. It's a very different ballgame. We don't really see it so much in New York City, but in Napa, we certainly do, and in the state of California. And there was an article from the San Francisco Chronicle that just came out talking about the fact that the corkage fees are on the rise. The $15 corkage fee is now 30. In some places, it's upwards of 100. French Laundry, I think famously has always had a very high corkage fee. It's now up at $200. I don't know. I mean, Laura, you've got a background as a wine director and sommelier at Napa Valley and Bay Area restaurants. I'm sure that you have some opinions on corkage, but it sounds like, this contentious, uncomfortable moment that always seems to occur in restaurants around corkage is not getting any better because the prices are up and people are unhappy. So what are your thoughts?
I always felt, and it is so different in Napa Valley. I mean, there's wine coming out of like every corner. So I understand that it just like is part of our life here. I always just felt like we did hospitality first. And if someone brings a bottle of wine, all you can do is say, this is going to be fantastic, and we're happy to serve it. And as far as the fees, I don't understand it being like trying to incentivize people not to bring them in because people are kind of just going to do what they're going to do. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's reasonable to say, charge a little bit to make up for a little bit of a loss of sale, but these exorbitant $200 for a bottle and then $300 for your next bottle just to punish people feels anti-hospitality in a
Mm-hmm.
way to me that like, and then you're just sitting there and you've already started off the dinner with an uncomfortable conversation about you know, this fee and making them feel bad about what they brought. And
Yeah.
it just, to me, it was like, look, it's like $30 is reasonable. It's what you would have spent on 2 glasses of wine. We'll open it, we'll serve it, enjoy.
I get the question all the time, like, is corkage acceptable? And to me, it's like if the restaurant has a policy and they say, yes, you can bring your own bottle, this is what the corkage fee is, then what I tell people is like, you respect the corkage, you research it ahead of time, and you definitely don't bring a bottle that they already have in the list. And then the other thing that I always say is like, when you can, try to buy something from the list, even if it's just a
Yes.
glass or dessert wine, preferably a bottle. But if you can squeeze 2 bottles in, that's great. I think the most contentious conversations we would have at the restaurant about corkage was just like, one, obviously the price, and our price was like very fair. It was like $30. The other contentious conversation was like the amount of bottles. And a lot of times what we would see is like people walking in with like cases of wine. And we're like,
Yes.
that's not
Yeah, that's
cool.
wild.
Yeah. Super wild.
That's wild.
Yeah. But I see both sides, right? And I understand like as a chef, you have curated this entire experience from top to bottom, right? Like you have someone at the door that is checking you in to make sure that from the moment you step foot onto the premises, you have an amazing experience. And I think as a chef, also, you want to make sure that the wines that are being enjoyed with this meal are also complimentary. So I think in that case, I understand it. I thought some of the quotes in this article were really interesting, and I do think it's worth reading because I think they take both sides of the argument. They showcase it really well, which is the emotional side of this. And so this is a quote from
Yeah.
Paul Einbund of the Morris, who said, "When people bring in wine to these restaurants that really care, that hurts, meaning that really care, meaning like they care about their wine programs." And he said emotionally as well as financially. And I do think like I remember like feeling a little bit not insulted because I would never like I don't feel insulted, but it does feel a little like we've taken so much time to like put this list together, and then you bring your own wine. You're like, okay, well, like I hope you enjoy it, and I want you to have a great hospitality experience. But I mean, even now, I get so uncomfortable having this conversation.
Well, even with the pairings, so much stuff goes into that. It's like they taste the food over and over again. They're tasting the food with the wine, and then if that wine doesn't work, they taste another one. It's like endless time and effort goes into these pairings, and it's like then it's kind of like a big fuck you. You come in here with your bottle of wine, you're like, no, that's not good enough. I want to drink my stuff. And it's like,
Yeah. There's another quote in here from someone that says it's already expensive to go out. I won't name the name that's quoted in here, then to get hit over the head with an extravagant corkage fee without any notice, I think is not right. And I think to that point, it's like, all right, yes, the restaurant does have a responsibility to maybe divulge what the corkage fee ahead of time, but also I consider corkage a privilege, not a right. And so to me, it's like it remains in the guest's hands. Like if you want to bring your own wine in, like research what that policy is
Mhm.
ahead of time and like inform yourself. And also like don't assume that corkage is free. And I think
No,
reading this article now, like it can really range the price. So make sure you are informed or ask.
it will always be a battle. It'll always
It
be
will always be a battle.
these wars are waged every night.
Yes. Be respectful. Last but
Mhm.
not least, there have been some great videos of this going around right now. The world's best sommelier was named. He is from Latvia. Raymond Thompson's was named the winner. This was so cool to watch. This is like basically the Olympics of somms where
Mhm.
people compete from their respective countries. They have to qualify, make it to final rounds. And then I think it's like the top like 5 end up competing on like the final stage. And it's pretty wild to watch. There's some great videos of the blind tastings going on. There's a great one of the guy who won doing like 4 white wines in a row. Then they bring some rocks to him. They're like associate the rocks with the wines. It's pretty wild. Have you seen any of this, Laura?
I haven't. I've read the articles. I saw who won, and I saw an American got pretty far into the semifinals.
Yeah.
But no, I haven't seen any of the videos. I will have to check those out.
Exciting times. Congratulations to the world's best sommelier. And then last but not least, this is just a crazy thing that happened over the weekend at Laura that I'm sure you saw, Troy, that I'm sure you're like, whatever. It snowed in Napa this weekend.
Mhm.
Did it really?
It sure
Yes.
did. Howe Mountain
Wow.
got like 12 inches. There were like cars covered with snow. People couldn't get down from Pritchard Hill. It was wild.
Get a little taste of how 10 months of my year is.
Exactly. I came
Yeah,
from the
it's
East Coast and I was
gorgeous.
like, surely it's not that bad. And then I looked around and the parking lot in Sunshine was just like all these trucks with like 6 inches of snow sitting on top of them because like nobody has shovels or anything to clean it off with. So
That's a good amount of snow.
this is a decent amount of snow, right? Yeah. I mean, for
Yeah,
a place that like maybe gets a dusting like maybe once a year, like that's a pretty significant amount.
And it's still up there. You
Oh
know,
yeah,
going
no,
it's
it's still
going up
there.
and down the valley. You can see both like the hillsides just it's gorgeous. It's the best
Oh,
kind as an
it's
East Coaster too. It's the best kind of snow because I don't have to do anything.
it's
I can just
gorgeous.
admire it
Just look
from a
up.
distance, from a warm
Yeah.
It's nice when
distance.
you don't have to shovel your driveway, right?
Oh yeah.
This is the moment where I have to ask everyone to like do something for us. Do us a favor, set down your wine, press pause, and like, subscribe, and review this podcast because it's really important for us to continue doing this. That we get these reviews, they help people to find our show. It's a wonderful way to let us know what you're loving, maybe what you want to see more of. Um, and if you do that, we are likely to read one of your reviews on the show, like I'm about to do right now. So this week's review is from Jen Sees You, who said her. This is actually a very aptly titled and clever review title, which is bar hopping. Amanda and Vanessa, I discovered your podcast while currently studying for the bar exam, and I'm loving it. I have intentionally gone dry for my exam, but I cannot wait to hit the bar after the bar and have a glass or a few of wine using some of my newfound knowledge. Cheers to you both and keep up the great work. Jen Sees You. I can't thank you enough for that review, and best of luck as you're studying for the bar. That's a pretty challenging exam. I've never done it myself, but I hear intense things. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. If you are listening to this, go ahead and do what Jen just did and leave us a review. We are going to jump into all things meat, but if you are not part of the wine club at this point, this is also your cue to sign up for the Wine Access Unfiltered Wine Club. We have a great time curating these wines. We had a really good time this month working with all the chefs and the full wine team to come up with some great epic pairings for these. You can find all that information in the description below. And if you are already subscribed, go ahead and grab your wines and we'll see you in 1 second. All right, we are back. Hopefully you have your wines in the glass. We've actually got 2 today. And when I asked Laura what I thought the second wine should be for our steak podcast, she responded Chardonnay. And I was like, I love where your head's at. You're the perfect person for the job. So I'm going to kick it off to you. Let's talk a little bit about these wines before we dive into all things steak. So we've got 2 wines. The Wine Club wine is a Rosso di Montalcino from Capanna. That's going to be Sangiovese. So, Laura, you are all things Italian wine expert. Why don't you take this one?
Student. It's always a student, never an expert. But yeah, this is a 2019 Rosso di Montalcino. So coming from Tuscany, from Montalcino, which is one of like this most beautiful places. It's, castle dotted hillsides and one of those UNESCO World Heritage sites. And their star grape is Sangiovese, and particularly Sangiovese Grosso, which is a clone that they use to create really their two marquee wines, which is Brunello di Montalcino, which is one of the most noble wines of Italy, but it does require a lot of time to make it. It requires a ton of time in bottle to age appropriately. So what we have today is the Rosso di Montalcino, which is some people consider the baby Brunello. It is the same grape coming from the same vineyards, but made in a really fresher style. And this is ready to drink within a year of it being produced. Whereas Brunello will take 5 to 6 years um, to be released into the market. So this is a nice, fresher style, but still it's got all of that Sangiovese meat on the bones. It's got that tannin and that acid, and it's got some richness, beautiful aromatics, some earthiness on the nose. And then you really feel that Sangiovese structure. So
Yeah, and I think as we talk about steak, you can't not talk about Tuscany without talking about like bistecca Florentina, right? Like such a great classic epic pairing, a little bit savory. You've got all those herbs on there, and I think these wines really speak to their place. I fell in love with Tuscany last year, about this time last year when I was there for the very first time, visiting a few producers, namely Biondi Santi, so kind of like the OG, Godfather producer of the region. But had so much fun discovering the Brunellos, all the Brunellos that I hadn't tasted, but also to your point, like these Rosso de Montalcinos just really, really punch above their weight class. Let's talk about Chardonnay for a second because this is a wine that we've talked about going with steak, but we've actually never like had it on the podcast while we were talking about steak. So you tell me, why was your first instinct Chardonnay?
well, I will say I am a white wine drinker,
Me too.
probably more than red. I love white wine, and I love Chardonnay in all its glorious forms. So when I think about food pairing, though, I really think about like matching intensity with intensity, and meat can be kind of bigger and richer and have that intense flavor and texture. So I think Chardonnay, particularly something grown in a warmer climate, has all of those things without overpowering a steak and kind of letting meat show itself. And then this is just super cleansing, but it matches the richness, it matches that boldness. There's a little bit of that oak that matches that sweet kind of char flavor that you can get on a steak. So I really love big Chardonnay
Yeah.
with meat dishes.
And I think you cleverly chose this one with an Italian tie-in, yeah?
True. So this is Antinori's estate here in Napa on Atlas Peak. I'm sure they're covered in snow right now, but this is from the family that originated. Their a Tuscan family. They've been around since the 1300s, hung out with the Medicis, and been in the wine business.
Very casual.
Been in the wine business for very long. Their famous properties, Tignello, Solaya. But Piero Antinori really fell in love with the Napa Valley, and so has an estate here where they produce some beautiful Cabernet as well as Chardonnay.
So this is the 2019 Antica Estate Chardonnay, and as you just said, all coming from Alice Peak. Not super normal to have Chardonnay coming from like more inland. Most of the Chardonnay from Napa is coming from Carneros. You see a few pockets in Spring Mountain, a little bit in like the Rutherford area, but very little coming from the mountainside. So super exciting to have something that's got elevation. This is between 760 to 2,600 feet in elevation, so it's got some nice legs on that. Soils are volcanic, and this has got a good amount of like of oak on it, which I appreciate. I think when you're talking about pairing with Chardonnay with steak, you do need a little bit of like oak treatment on it to help with the structure of the wine to stand up to your respective steaks. And I think as we jump into the first section of all things steak, where we're gonna pick Troy's brain on, we're going to start with Wagyu. And I have to say, one of my favorite pairings of all time was when I was working at Press. We were serving Wagyu, and no matter what I tried, no red wine I tried with it, I just couldn't find the right pairing for it. And I was like, you know what? Let me try a white wine. And I had like a little bit of this like aged Chardonnay from like the 90s. So I popped the bottle, I poured it, and I was like, this is amazing. This is exactly what this meat needed. It was a white wine, not a red wine, which I found so fascinating. So before we dive in, for those of you who don't know Chef Troy George, I just want to like give you a little roundup so his credibility is fully established, because I know that he's great and Laura knows that he's great. And if you want to do a Google search, you'll quickly realize that he's great. But as we mentioned, born and raised in Massachusetts in New Bedford, you've worked at a few places, the Ritz-Carlton, Astra. You were also at Grace, which was a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant with Curtis Duffy back when that was open. That was one of my favorite meals of all time. You were at Acadia, and now you're the executive chef at the 1 Michelin-starred Temporis. Let's jump into Epic Meat Night. What determines the pairing? Wagyu. What are your thoughts on Wagyu? Is it worth the price? What are the best preparations? What's your take?
Is this something we should leave to the pros? Can you do it at home?
Yeah, for sure you can do it at home. You just can't. I feel like when a high price tag gets attached to something, people get nervous, and it's just like any other piece of meat. You cook it the same way, and I think once in your life, it's definitely worth the price. You should try it because I mean, for me, it kind of it ruins steak.
In a good way or a
Nothing.
bad way?
I mean, in a good way.
Okay.
It's just another level. Once you taste Wagyu, and it's like it's it's just like a whole nother world. You're like, wow. And it's one of those things where you don't need a huge piece of steak. You need like 2, 3, 4 ounces maybe.
I think when I dined in the restaurant, it was part of it was really in the beginning of the meal. It was like one of the canapes.
Well, it's tough because you get this piece of meat, and you only get like 60% yield as far as where it goes in the menu. So you have all this trim and stuff. So you have to find creative ways to use it. So we take the trim, we grind it up, and we make a dumpling out of it, and then we fry it. So we're not just throwing that stuff away.
So you're working with Wagyu. Are you working with American Wagyu or Japanese Wagyu?
Japanese,
Japanese. What are your thoughts on
Japanese for sure.
American Wagyu? Is there's a difference? Yeah.
American Wagyu is good, but I definitely like if you want to experience Wagyu, you want to go with the Japanese stuff.
Yeah.
Right now we've used the Australian stuff for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of the Australian stuff. I think the Australian stuff tastes a little bit better, but like it doesn't have that crazy unctuousness that the Japanese stuff has.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it's also not as rich, so you could actually eat a whole 10-ounce steak of the Australian stuff and then not ruin your day the next day.
Maybe not have an immediate
But
heart attack after.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
okay, so let's say like this is not something you're going to go to the store and buy, right? Like you've got to source it from like a good purveyor. In fact, I've gotten some from a couple great purveyors. I'll list some in the description. But I grab like 8 ounces of Wagyu. I get it home. It's fresh. What do I do?
Normally, you'd let it come up to room temp, but with A5, it's like so fatty. Once it comes up to room temp, it's like it's literally melting away on you.
Okay.
So I would let it temper a little bit, not as long as you normally would with a regular steak. And then for me, we would just sear it in a pan, baste it with some butter, and
You
just a
put
little bit
butter
of
in the
salt. That's all
pan.
you need. Well, after you sear it, you got to baste it a little bit. So
Okay.
Wow.
Even with all that fat, like you still need to like let her ride a little
well,
bit.
it needs another cooking medium to get it to the point where you want it. Otherwise, it's just gonna burn on the
Oh,
outside. You
okay,
don't want to do that after you spend $200 for a piece of meat.
okay.
And
And then do you salt it as well or no?
Yeah, just a little salt, and then when it's done cooking, you cut it up and you add a little fancy salt or finishing salt, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Personally, I like Murray River salt. It's from Australia. It's extremely delicious. It's not too expensive. You can find it on Amazon.
I mentioned it earlier with the Wagyu. I think especially if you're serving it the way that Chef just talked about, which is just like a light sear, a little salt. I think this is where Chardonnay really shines. You could even go sparkling with it too, especially if it like is a richer style of Chardonnay, like a Krug. Like I want a little bit of oak on my champagne. When we're talking about Wagyu, we're talking about a steak that's got a significant percentage of animal fat, right? Like it's what is it like 60% or something? It's like super high.
It's close to. It's probably in between, depending on the piece you get. It's in between 50 to 60% fat.
And so when we're talking about like food and wine pairing 101, I think the things that you have to think about are like tannin and acid. Um, if you've got a piece of steak and you've got the animal protein part of it, like that's what you want to bind with the tannin of your red wine. If you've got a ton of fat, that's what you want the acid for. And so when that ratio is skewed the way that it is, with fat surpassing the animal protein side of it, that's when you've got to skew your wine a little bit higher to go higher acidity, slightly lower tannin, because you don't have as much of that animal protein to bind with. And so that's kind of what led me in the direction of the Chardonnay, that like still has tannin because it's been aged in oak, it has body, it has richness, but it still has a significant amount of acid to cut through all that fat without overwhelming it. Have you found that to be the case as well, Laura?
I fully agree. With Wagyu in particular, I always
Mm-hmm.
found that the richer the steak, the more fat, the more I wanted white wine or like a really like a richer champagne. It just
Yeah.
and I because I got to actually really appreciate the meat more
Yeah.
without as much of the heavier flavors of a red wine or the heavier tannin. I
Mm-hmm.
really got to experience what that Wagyu is. And that's why I do kind of love these, like, I go to these restaurants and they do Wagyu up front as like kind of
Yeah.
barely seared piece. And you really get to experience the beauty of that product. And usually in your glass at that time is champagne. So
Yeah.
it seems to work.
The other thing that I've done at home, if you when you're searing the steaks, I go to my like local sushi restaurant and I ask for some sushi rice
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not going to make it properly at home. So I get like a side of sushi rice and I'll do just like a little bit of wagyu on top of some sushi rice, just as like a little snack.
You guys are living it up. Wagyu hand rolls at home? Wow.
That's right. What are you doing at home, chef?
Not Wagyu hand rolls, that's for sure.
What is the cut that you bring home? Like if you're gonna grill, in that 2-month window when you can go outside in Chicago,
Yeah.
to grill, like what are the cuts that you're gonna bring home?
I mean, for me, on my days off, it's like you want to cook, but you don't want to spend a super long time cooking. So I always go with sirloins or New York strips. They're just easy for me. I think it's quick. It's a couple minutes on the grill and let it rest, and you're good to go.
Well, speaking of the grill, like if you're not at a restaurant, you're at home, what do you think is the ultimate meat preparation? Is it grill? Is it pan fry? I'm not even gonna talk about braise because I can't. I hate braise, but like sous vide. Where is your stance on all that?
I mean, I would go grilled. I think everything tastes better grilled or fried. So you really can't go wrong with the grill.
Working over open flame, I'm terrified every time I have it open. Even though I feel like kind of a badass in front of the grill, I'm always terrified. I'm like, I'm gonna burn this thing for sure. Like the flames are definitely gonna come up and like
Mhm.
overtake this steak. So like, do you have any tips for grilling steak?
I think the biggest mistake mostly every people make is trying to grill on a cold grill. Like they go outside, they turn it on, all of a sudden they see flames and they're immediately throwing chicken or a steak on the grill, and it's like it's just going to stick and burn. So you need to like light your grill, close the lid, let that thing sit for like 30 minutes to get
30
everything hot.
minutes.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a long
think about it.
time.
If you turn your oven on, how long does your oven take to heat up to 10? You're working with a thing outside that's ice cold. There's wind blowing. You probably safe to bet would be good 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes.
Is there a test to know like when it's ready to go? Like a sizzle test or something?
No, I mean I mean, after you've been doing it for a while, you kind of just know. But I mean, if you want like a fail safe, just buy a digital thermometer on Amazon for meat, and then it's like foolproof, really.
And then what should it read if you get the thermometer?
I mean, it all depends on what you want. So, like, if you wanted medium rare, I would hit it to 90, 95 degrees, and you let it rest for 10 minutes. It's going to bump up. It's usually always going to come up 10 to 15 degrees after it rests.
Mm,
So whatever you pull it off the grill at, it's going to go up 10 to 15 degrees. So
mm. So
if
you
you want it
so you
at
meant a digital
120,
thermometer for the actual meat, not for the actual grill.
yeah, for the actual
Got
meat.
it. Okay, so I know like chefs roll their eyes at like medium well, right? Medium well is like don't do it. Where's your temperature?
I like steak medium rare, but if I'm eating Wagyu, I like it more medium. I think
Mhm.
with Wagyu, there's so much fat. It needs to be cooked a little bit more. But hey, I grew up on well done steaks. Both my parents like cooked the shit out of everything. It was like shoe leather. And then once I went to culinary school, I was like, oh, there's like another world out here with steak. It's actually good. So
Doesn't taste like a tire. What about like sous vide? Because I've definitely used that before.
how was your experience with that?
It was pretty good. Like I think it
Yeah,
feels a little like you're boiling meat, which is odd.
yeah.
But when you're talking like, especially if I've got like a bigger cut that I'm a little bit more uncertain that like I'm going to get an even whatever, like it's kind of
Gotcha.
nice. But I don't know, from like a chef's point of view, you're like, save it for the pros, like don't do it.
I mean, sous vide's nice. I think it has its place. It's nice because you can drop it in and like kind of forget about it or do other things. So it allows you to be a little bit more productive. And then every time you pull it out, it's always perfect. But I mean, you still have to do certain things to it. You have to steer it when it comes out. So,
Yeah.
We're such a tiny restaurant. We're short on space. We don't really sous vide a lot of stuff. And everything's pretty much a la menu. I mean, I've sous vide steaks at home. It's nice because you drop it in the water and you come back and an hour later you just sear it in the pan and it's perfect medium rare or medium or however whatever temp you put the circulator on. So
Okay.
I mean, it has its place for sure.
Okay, so if you're at the grocery store, right, and you mentioned sirloin's your favorite, like ribeye, New York, filet.
Like filet's nice and tender, but it's pretty basic. So sirloins are super flavorful, but a little bit more tougher than ribeyes. Ribeyes is super flavorful, a little bit more tender, more so tender like a filet, but not as tougher as a sirloin would.
What's your steak preference, Laura?
Um, I'm kind of a cheap date. I like skirt steak.
Oh,
And
you
like
are a
hanger
skirt steak. I like
Skirt
that.
steak's delicious.
That is my go-to. But I've had some great, like, in Tuscany in particular, like those big bisteccas that are like, like a petite, and I'm like, that's an experience like worth at least, once a year, every couple years, like doing and enjoying. But yeah, if I'm going to the store, I'm definitely buying like a skirt.
I want to talk about this Rosso di Montalcino a little bit. Chef, I know you're a cab guy, a red guy. I think this is a great wine, but I think this is a great example of a wine that like would be significantly improved with food. And I think for me, it's definitely going to be in the steak department. Like, I'm a ribeye girl. Sign me up for ribeye with a Rosso di Montalcino like this, because it's got like, it's interesting. It's a little deceiving, and I find these wines to be like incredibly deceiving in general, especially like Sangiovese, which sort of on the on the periphery looks like it's and feels like it's going to be a light to medium bodied wine, but then you dig in there, you're like, oh no, there's like a ton of richness and intensity and like tannin and structure. And I think this is a perfect example of that, right? Because you're like, oh, it doesn't look like super heavy. Like it definitely doesn't look like a cab. But then you taste it and you're like, oh, that's like a mouthful. Like there's like some serious tannin on there. There's some serious acid. There's like grapefruit. But it's definitely more on like the tart fruit side of things, which I really like. And I think if you're talking about steaks, especially if we're leading more into like if you're adding in rosemary, if you're adding in garlic, if you're going in that direction, like this is such a great wine for that.
Yeah, it's got a lot of body for sure, and it doesn't look like it's going to be heavy.
You want the wine to like stand up to the actual meat, but you don't want it to overpower it because like there's so much intensity happening in your mouth already that you want something that's going to sort of like clean it all up. So you actually, as much as you want a full bodied wine, like you don't want it to be too over the top because it's like it's a lot. Like you need a sip of something to like
break it up a little bit,
give you some palate break. And they're both opening beautifully. I do have a slight chill on the Rosso di Montalcino. Do you, Laura? Or did you?
Yeah, it was cellar temp, and it is opening up really nicely. I actually just pulled the cork. I think you could decant this wine and it'll be even better in an hour or so. It's got this great herbaceousness too. It's got that oregano and that like rosemary. I just like that herbal tinge to it.
Yeah. I always love that about Italian wines. Like it reminds me of the Italian herbs that you would find in the steaks and the sauces and everything. And to your point about like letting it open up, if you wanted to have this 2 nights in a row, you totally could like drink half the bottle. And I think this is a great example of a wine that actually would maybe improve after a day of being open. Like I think it would like settle a little bit. And I love that about Italian wines. It's like, they can't be broken. Like they can legitimately stay like really, really delicious for like days. Just make sure you put a cork in it and put it in the fridge. Like don't just leave it out on your counter. You'll be very disappointed.
For sure. It'd be a great by the glass in a restaurant. Cause like if you open a bottle to finish like at night and then it's open the next day, it's even better.
Thoughts and sauces, chimichurri, barbecue, au jus. You like the sauce?
At home, no. I'm kind of just grill it and slice it and eat it. I do like chimichurri though. If you're
chimichurri is delicious.
Grilling and if you're having people over or whatever, chimichurri for sure.
What if you're at like a steakhouse and like you have all those options at the bottom of the menu? Like, do you go for the option?
I'm more of a sides guy than sauces, but
sometimes I think you can make a whole meal out of like the classic steakhouse sides, like just like hash browns and
definitely
roasted
it's like
vegetables.
endless choices there too.
It just
Having
like
worked at a steakhouse for 5 years, I know to be absolutely the fact that you can make a whole meal on a side. So many potato cakes with, like, spinach and broccoli and, mac and cheese. The mac and cheese was like that was like a truffled mac and cheese too.
Would you do big steak tastings at press, like, where they would just have
Well, the interesting thing at press was, like, for forever, it was just Flannery beef, which we've talked about on the show before, and I'm a huge fan of, which is a California purveyor. They do use some Midwestern stuff for other, sections of meat that they sell, but, like, their mainstay is the California Holstein cattle, which is the male dairy cattle. And the marbleization ratio is a little bit different, and it's more like pinpricked instead of layered. And so that meat was really interesting because it was grain fed, grass finished, so it didn't have a super gamey feel, and it was only about 18 days dry aged. So it was like, to me, it was like the perfect beef. And so that's all we were using. So we got to know Flannery pretty intimately. What about you, Laura? Did they do like tastings?
we would have, we were looking to like change up the menu and they would bring in, a variety of like dry age stuff and they would grill them up all the same and you'd get to kind of really experience like what is the difference between, the aging and the types and it was amazing. It was very eye-opening, but I can remember those dinner services being difficult after you've had like
So full.
you've done a whole meat tasting and at like 2 o'clock and then you're like, okay, and I gotta like there's not enough espresso to like to push you through dinner service.
It's like after Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah,
Exactly,
exactly.
exactly. We've got some questions from the audience. I mentioned that we wanted to highlight some of the city things from our chefs. So, chef, any favorite local spots in Chicago that you love?
So my favorite restaurant in Chicago is probably Mama Delia. It's in Wickapock. It's Spanish tapas and paella.
Yum.
They always got a great vibe, play great music, food's always great. They got a good wine list.
What about pizza?
Pizza. So my favorite place was a place called Beibu, but it's closed now. Kind of the pandemic kind of crushed them.
Okay.
But if you want like New York style, probably Dobro's is probably my favorite spot in the city.
Side question. This is not from the audience, but it just reminded me. Did you watch The Bear? I have to ask.
I have watched The Bear. Well,
Look
I
at him
haven't
take a
watched the
sip
whole
of his
thing.
wine. He's like, I watched it. Was it PTSD or like, this is not real?
No, I stopped watching after the third episode.
Have you seen the menu?
I actually saw the menu 2 weeks ago. The menu, so I thought it was super stupid before I saw it. Then it grew on me as I started watching it. I got a good laugh at the ending. I thought the ending was very, very clever.
Yeah.
No, well,
Yeah.
spoiler alert. So you're not serving a s'more anytime soon or a
No,
take
No,
on a
we're not
s'more.
serving s'mores. No s'mores and no desserts on the table.
I loved the sommelier. I loved the way he it tastes like desperation.
Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant. I thought it
Yeah.
was just it hit on so many nerves for me of like the industry and the culture around all this stuff. I loved it.
We have a question about I literally can't wait for your response on this. Does Impossible or Beyond Meat work the same with wine? Have you tried it?
I have tried it. I remember the first time I tried it. It was at a food hall. We were at some event, and they were there doing the Impossible stuff. And I remember eating it, and I was like, "Holy shit! This tastes like the hamburgers we used to
Yeah.
get in high school."
Yeah.
But,
That's exactly
yeah,
what they taste
no,
like.
100%.
Like,
100%.
good or bad.
I mean, I think it's good because they've replicated that flavor. Like it tastes like beef for sure.
But does it work with wine? Have you tried it, Laura?
It's not my favorite product to use like at home in the kitchen, but
Mhm.
it is an interesting alternative. Yeah, I think you just have to kind of dial the wine back a little bit. Like if you were thinking cab, like maybe you go for a Pinot Noir, something a little bit lighter because it doesn't like pack the punch. But yeah, I think it's a great, if you're looking for an alternative, I think you have to temper your expectations. Like
Yes. Last question. What is the best thing to make with leftover steak?
Steak and cheese sandwich. Slice it thin. Melt some cheese on it.
All right.
Or steak and eggs, maybe. Throw it in your omelet.
Laura, you?
you heat up a tortilla, call it a taco,
Tacos.
I think
Great.
is
Yeah, there you
an
go.
easy way
That's
to
a great one.
go.
then you can throw chimichurri in there.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. I had prime rib left over from the holidays. I did this huge prime rib and ended up
Me
with a
too.
ton. I like cut it really, really like small, and then kind of was like cornstarch and like fried it up and did this like Asian kind of stir fry thing with it. That was really good.
I always have the ingredients for fried rice. I make rice like a
Mhm.
couple times a week. Always have it
Fried
in the
rice is a good
fridge.
one too.
Yeah, just little egg, little soy, whatever else you got in your fridge.
Little
Whip it up.
Wagyu hand rolls too.
Like a hand roll, yeah.
Hand roll.
Oh, this has been so much fun. I love talking about meat, but it's making me real hungry. So if you haven't joined the Wine Access Unfiltered Wine Club already, now is your chance to do so. We're having so much fun picking out these amazing wines, sharing them on the podcast with our guests. Our guests love them as much as we do. At least that's what they're telling us. So if you haven't done that, go ahead in the description, click sign up and do your thing. Once again, if you haven't reviewed this podcast and liked it and subscribed it and done all the things that we've asked you to do, we really encourage you to do that. It's so helpful. And in fact, we'll cheers you from afar just for doing it. So thanks in advance for that. Chef, this has been so amazing. I know you got to get to service.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure seeing you guys and chatting and talking about beef and Wagyu hand rolls. So
that's right. You can find Chef Troy Jorge at his restaurant Temporis in Chicago. Highly recommend. Make sure you got it on your bucket list if you are heading out there. Of course, make your reservations in advance because it's not a super easy reservation to get. Laura, so good to have you on the podcast finally.
Yes, thank you for having me on and sharing these great wines. And I look forward to making some steak very, very soon.
Thank you all so much for listening. Once again, this is the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, Amanda McCrossin, with Laura Koffer, who not only co-hosted, but also produced this episode. So thank you, Laura, for that. We'll see you all next time. Cheers.